As I said, teaching in New South Wales, about 65,000 of them last count. We're having difficulty struggling with the new initiatives that are being imposed upon us. Notice I still use the royal plural because I still regard myself as a school teacher. How about teacher training at the University of New England? We started in 1928 as a teachers' college. 1938 it became affiliated with the University of Sydney. And then shortly after that, I think 1943, it was given its standalone status. There are 19,700 enrolments in total. But of those, 15,300 are not on campus, do not attend the university. They are all taught online.
What was that number?
15,300 external students.
80% or something like that.
It's a lot. And there are teachers in Singapore, students in Singapore and New Zealand and Malaysia and Western Australia even, all over the place. There are teachers in Oregon, I have students of mine doing their teacher qualification actually that live in Oregon. We have 4,300 enrolled in teacher education, which makes us a fairly significant teacher education institution. When you think that we turn over 6,000 in the state, we provide a fair number. But we only graduate about 900 a year. And that number is decreasing. As I mentioned earlier, you can do the various qualifications. Notice that we have that many primary or elementary or K-6 teachers, and approximately a third of those, or just a bit more than a third, secondary teachers. And at the present moment, UNE has 1,463 postgraduate students in education. Now that might sound a large number looking at those other figures, but in fact they are doing a postgraduate diploma of education, people that already have a degree. Getting that 1-year postgraduate diploma of education entitles them to become a teacher. Or they're silly people like me doing a PhD, or there are others doing a Master of Education, or there are other people doing various other postgraduate qualifications. This will bore you to death. I do come from a family of teachers. My father, his father, his father, and his father were all teachers.
They were teaching back then?
Noah. Oh, sorry, Professor Finkelstein. Yes, my great-great-great-grandfather was a ship's captain, but when they came out from Ireland during the potato famine, he decided that teaching was an easy vocation, so he chose to be that. But then again, my sister is a teacher, my father mentioned earlier was a teacher, my mother was a teacher, my first wife was a teacher, my second wife is a teacher. I've told my kids if they become teachers, I'll kill them.
Surefire way to get them to be teachers.
Well, one of them's a musician and the other one's in radio, so... Very simple career. Began as a teacher, became a head teacher. Interestingly, in our system, the better at teaching you get, the less of it you do. So when somebody said to me one day, gee, you're a good teacher, so next minute I find myself out of the classroom and I'm a consultant. But that was a lot of fun because I was able to whiz around all of New South Wales and talk to science teachers about teaching science. And I thoroughly enjoyed that. Then, for some reason or other, I got shoved back into schools as a principal. Then I retired. I told Noah the story earlier. Then I this is slightly out of order. I went and did a course on horticulture because I love gardening. And then I taught horticulture for a while, and while I was doing that I was saving up to do a commercial pilot's licence. So I taught people how to fly for a while, and then they sold the business, so I retired. I still love teaching golf to little kids because I'm only little. I got a phone call from a good friend of mine who said, come back to the university and teach teachers how to teach, Bruce. I said, are you sure? He said, yes. That was in 2005. I became so fascinated with the teaching process that I decided I really wanted to find out about it, and that's when I embarked upon this project. I don't know what I'm going to do next, but I guess neither do most of you. Life is a real mystery. Why am I doing this? That's the question I said, don't ask me, so we'll pass over that. But I do believe that science is in crisis at present. We are in a situation whereby the world is screaming out for scientists. I mean, your English people can write about how the world's going to blow up and die. Your mathematicians can calculate when it's going to happen. Your economists can calculate when how much it's going to cost. But it's only scientists that can prevent it happening. Because we are the problem solvers in the world. Now, science is in crisis. Physics is dying. And I believe that there are two main reasons for that. We, that's me and my generation, still teach physics the way we were taught physics. Nods, I notice. And that was transmissively. You are empty vessels. I will open my mouth and give you knowledge. And then you will regurgitate it to me. As bored to death as you may be, you will still give it back to me. I'll tick the box and you can go out and be physicists. Society has changed. Kids now want instant gratification. They want to know the answer now. They don't want to go and investigate or, think. If it's got a joystick, they're laughing. If they've got to flick through a page, forget it. When I started to teach primary teachers, one of the first questions, I've got a lecture theatre full of 200 aspiring first year undergraduates sitting there fresh out of high school. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hand up please if you've done any post-compulsory science. That's past year 10. And I'd get 10 or a dozen, maybe 20 in a good year. None of them, relatively, so few of them have done any post-compulsory science. And you begin to ask them the question, why not? Too hard. Boring. Irrelevant. Couldn't do well. And then you get down to the real nitty-gritty. Couldn't see a career in it. Scientists don't get paid enough. Scientists are all nerdy. All of these reasons came back as to why they weren't prepared to do science. And these are all aspiring primary or elementary school teachers. You'd say to them, righto, you've got to know some science because you've got to go out and teach it. And the clever ones amongst them would say, no, we don't. And I'd say, what do you mean? Well, when I went to primary school, when it was our science time, we went to the library. And that still happens. No, I'm not kidding. That still happens. Statistically, where is it? I'll have to go back. Statistically, there's approximately 280 weeks in a primary school week, minutes in a primary school week. Or is it? Anyway, only 8% of that, on average, is science. 8%. When you get to secondary school, it drops to 7% of the school week, on average, teaching science. So when I began to think about this project, I thought to myself, well, gosh, isn't primary school where we really should be starting to get kids inspired and excited and enthused about doing science? The answer that I gave myself, because I listened to myself a lot, was yes, Bruce. So I sat down with these kids and I pre-tested them and I said, righto, you tell me what you know about science. Very, very little. And electricity and magnetism, least of all. So I said to them, well, gosh, oh, geez, you've got to learn it. No, we don't. Yes, you do. No, you don't. Well, what do you want? I said to them. We don't want to know the content, we want to know how to teach it. If we get to the situation where we have to teach it, we'll find out the content. But we've done 10 years of schooling, learning science, and it didn't work then. So why would you dare try to ram down our throats 10 years of science education in a grand total of 24 hours of instruction? Won't work. Gosh, I said. Can I model for you how to teach science? Yes, that's what we want. So I then began on this project, what's the best way to teach science to people that don't know anything about science? And I came up with all these things that I've been doing for 30 years and didn't know there was a name for it, like constructivism and social constructivism and pre-testing and post-testing and peer involvement, peer interaction, peer learning, all these terms that have been espoused by education theorists and lecturers and teacher trainers for years. It did have names. But I said to them, righto, well, you're supposed to learn electricity and magnetism, a bit about biology, plants and floating and sinking, and why was the answer? Because it's in the syllabus. Why is it in the syllabus was the question. That's when I began to struggle. As I said to Noah earlier on, what came first, the textbook or the syllabus? I decided, therefore, that I would go back and find out what people should be taught, particularly in today's society. And the very first phase of my project was to go and ask a bunch of people. And I asked teachers, and I asked education lecturers, and I asked physicists, and I asked electricians, and I asked retailers, and I asked lines people, and I asked hairdressers, and I asked all sorts of people. What should be taught to K6 kids about electricity and magnetism that is fundamental, that can help them understand future developments? I didn't want to go to the textbooks. I didn't want to look at syllabi. I didn't want to think about where it was all coming from. So I put myself in this guy's shoes. Notice when he made this program. Instruction begins when you, the teacher, learn from the learner. And that was so moving to me that the model I chose to present to these aspiring teachers was how they could be the learner. How they could identify how they learn. And if they could identify how they learned, they could better understand how the students were learning. And if they knew how the students were learning, they could present to them material in a way that would facilitate that learning process. And it was my dad that said this to me: you must know, in other words, learn how to learn before you can teach others how to do it. So for the last 2.5 years I've been trying to work out how people learn, and there's so much to learn about how people learn. Because everybody learns differently. And that's where I really argue against prescribed syllabi. What floats this person's boat drags it to the bottom very, very quickly. I chose electricity and magnetism, as I said, because today it is fundamental to society. Everything. Your very existence is based on electricity and magnetism and their interrelationships, the phenomena that go with it. I did a lot of reading. There's a fair bit out there on how electricity and magnetism is learned in universities and even in secondary schools, and to a lesser extent in primary schools. There's a lot of stuff out there on the resources to use, including those that are being produced by this esteemed institution. There's lots of ways to assess knowledge of electricity and magnetism and how teachers understand it, their content knowledge, the whole bit. There's also a lot of research into why people don't like to study science, and particularly physics, and most particularly electricity and magnetism. But you try and tell me where there is any out there on how teachers learn how to teach it. They don't. Well, very few of them do. So, I guess the bottom line of my research was to help teachers learn how to teach it as part of their teacher training process.